Hey, how we going, guys? It's another episode of Thavy Recommends. Dan and I have something cooking in the works, so hopefully this app kind of ties you over. I've been wanting to talk about the works of Chung Mong-hong. He's a Taiwanese director. He's also a screenwriter and cinematographer. I wanted to recommend two of his films that you can find on Netflix. One of them is A Son, which I mentioned in the special mentions of, I think it was my best of list, and the more recently released The Falls, which I think Dan posted on one of our Sunday recommends. Just wanted to talk about these films because I wanted to talk more about Taiwanese cinema. So sorry, I might be messing up some of these names. My Mandarin pronunciation's not the best. But yeah, what I've noticed is a lot of really good Taiwanese cinema. There's a lot that's on Netflix. I've been watching a fair few Taiwan films. Taiwanese cinemas kind of in the 80s, 90s and early thousands movement. I think there was kind of a Taiwan new wave that really influenced a lot of the really popular Asian directors. A lot of the cinema then is kind of very slow, really long shots, very minimalistic. But with these kind of newer films coming out, I've noticed that there's kind of a shift. You still have a lot of the the long takes, but they're a little bit more stylized. So I wanted to talk about these two particular films that are pretty accessible. Chung Mong-hong, I think he's been in the game for a little while. Yeah, he's won a number of Golden Horse Awards. I think that's kind of like the Taiwan Academy. And yeah, his style it's pretty interesting. He works again a lot with the director of Classmates Minus. That's also a really great film that you check out. I guess I wanted to mention A Son first. So I first saw this movie and it really blew me away. It really is one of the greats of that year. I guess I call it at its core a family drama. The story is about the family, and basically I guess he's the protagonist. His name is Aho, and he is arrested and is in juvenile detention. And much of the film focuses on the family and how they deal with his absence. And it's interesting because there's a lot of mixed elements with this film. It's kind of shot almost in a noir. There's a lot of strong color palettes to it, but it's within its soundtrack. There's a lot of horns and guitar that it's quite interesting. I've not seen it really in the kind of cinema. I know Korean cinema uses a lot of orchestral swells, whereas from this director, he uses a lot of very kind of muted horns and guitars, and it's kind of cool. It's almost like a western, so it's pretty interesting. So basically, the film starts off with Aho wants to kind of intimidate this guy named Oden. So him and his buddy Radish go into a restaurant, a hot pot restaurant, and Radish immediately pulls out a machete and cuts off Oden's hand. You might be thinking, oh, is this another one of your really dark, moody films? It is dark and moody, but it's much less heavy than the other films that I had talked about before. But yeah, this burst of violence is really gripping immediately. But then we kind of go into the family and how his father kind of rejects his son after he is committed to juvenile detention. He, doesn't want to talk to him. He doesn't want any mention of him. He doesn't even want him to be free. At this point, I think he's on the phone, his wife, and he's just let him kind of stay in jail. Please let him stay there till he gets old and dies, So it's kind of heartbreaking to see a father kind of dismiss his son so easily. We kind of see Aho's journey in the juvenile detention. He's obviously fresh meat, so he gets bullied. But then he has to kind of prove himself. And within the family, I think Aho has I think he has a girlfriend that she comes to the family, and her and her mother come to the family, and then she's actually, announces that she's pregnant. So there's kind of like, responsibility, and responsibility is kind of a big theme in this film. The father wants nothing to do with Xiao Yu, which is Ah-ho's girlfriend, just to kind of give some clarity. But the mother is kind of a bit more accepting, so she kind of helps her out, which it's pretty nice, like, touch, the family themselves are not the most, like, richest people. They kind of get by. I think Ah-ho's dad, Arwen, the father, doesn't want to do anything like at all, and he works in the he works as like a driving instructor. There's an example of some pretty like funny, like, dry humor that's in this movie, because the movie can get pretty heavy with the emotions and with the themes. But there's a pretty funny scene where I think it's Oden's dad. So Oden was the guy who got his hand cut off. He settled something with the courts, and he's seeking money from Arwen, but Arwen just like rejects him. He's like, why don't you get money from the guy who actually cut off the hand of your son? And they're like, but Radish, his grandma, like, she's, she can't afford it. She's old and she's basically useless. But Arwen keeps refusing. And then at one point, Oden's father, he's like a sewage worker, and he gets so like fed up and annoyed at Arwen's rejections that he like goes to the driving school and pumps all the shit from his van onto the field. And it's kind of played almost like a funny moment in a Korean drama, and it kind of seems out of place. Like you wouldn't expect such a scene in the film, but it works, and it's funny. It kind of cuts that tension a little bit. But yeah, we also see that his father much prefers the brother, Ah-ho, I think is his name. He feels the pressure from his father and mother to kind of, be the successful son. He's going to uni, but you see him, he kind of drops out of class and is a bit aimless, and he's got kind of his own philosophy on how he does things. But he returns home, and he loves his parents, and he tries to go and see Ah-ho when he's in juvenile detention. He even offers to take Xiao Yu to go see Ah-ho in juvenile detention, but you see that like she's rejected by like the guard, and there's a common like theme of rigid systems that don't run on kind of compassion, I suppose. Because she's, they're not married, but the guard's like, you're just a girlfriend. You can't come in. The brother can come in, but not you. So, like, it's kind of asking the question, like, what is a family really? And when you kind of follow Ah-ho's journey in the juvenile detention, there are some surprisingly, like, touching scenes in there. I think he spends about 3 or 4 years there. And it's not explicitly shown, but you can definitely tell that he has changed in terms of his maturity, because he kind of starts off as someone who, is meek and just follows orders. At the start of the film, like, you see him kind of rat out his friend Radish, one of the main perpetrators. He cut off Oden's hand, and he's like, are you going to blame all of this shit on me, kind of thing. He doesn't want to, tattle on his friend, but like he's kind of scared. This is quite a big thing. He mentions that he never planned to cut off his hand. That's Ah-ho. He just wanted to scare him, but this like incident had led him, go to basically juvenile detention. But the way that he earns respect in the detention is quite, it's heartwarming. And when he eventually leaves, they kind of like do like a song for him, and it's actually really sweet. So there's a lot of pretty nice moments in this movie, especially involving the character of Xiao Yu. How the mother, she helps her out a lot. I think she opens a salon, like goes into hairdressing, and she like trains her and helps her out, and she kind of integrates her into the family. And even the Xiao Yu's mother, who's revealed to be her auntie, kind of talks. She's kind of standoffish at first. She's like, it's your fault that she's pregnant. Like, your son did this. But she kind of eases up on the family talking about the father character, Arwen, it kind of seems like he's the stereotypical, stubborn father who, like, you're supposed to dislike, but he actually has the most interesting arc in this film. I actually shouldn't really say any more about this movie because the real hook of this film is actually when it comes to the midpoint after Aho is released from juvenile detention and tries to integrate back into society. There's kind of like the tension between the father and the son who, Aho's trying to receive like his affection again kind of thing. But yeah, there's a twist that happens, and I don't want to give away too much, but it's almost kind of like a Cape Fear angle, like if anyone's seen that movie, and it's very compelling. Like it gets very distressing. Yeah, I guess it's kind of like a tonal shift, and that's pretty much all I'll say about this movie. It's really like, yeah, this one section in the film was the one that I was like, wow, this is really like a original piece of filmmaking. I hadn't really kind of experienced anything like this before. So yeah, go check out A Son. It's fantastic movie. Yeah, so the next film that I want to talk about is called The Falls. This one was released on Netflix, I think earlier this year, I think sometime in March. I initially was only going to do just this one film in this Recommends episode, but I couldn't let A Son just go by and not talk about it because it really is like a fantastic film. But yeah, we get another really good film from Chung Mong-hong. I originally wanted to do this one for Mother's Day special because the film follows kind of like the tension between a mother and a daughter during the COVID pandemic in Taiwan. But yeah, I don't know, Dan seemed like he didn't really want to do it. Every time I kind of mentioned it, he kind of like dismissed it. So all right, I'll just do this one on my own. And I think we wanted to talk about Pachinko because that was kind of more trending at that point. But yeah, I wanted to talk about this film because this really is an excellent movie. Yeah, so as I said, it kind of takes place during the COVID pandemic. So we start off with the mother. Her name is Pin Wen, and we see her kind of struggling with work. She's worried about getting her pay cut because all the employees are getting their pays cut with COVID. Her daughter Jing, she's kind of the at the beginning, we see her as like a very stereotypical bratty kid. She kind of blows up her mother a lot. She's spoiled. She kind of doesn't treat her with very much respect. And we see one of the plot points is that a student in Jing's class gets COVID, and she's sent home, and her mother has to go pick her up. She has to leave her meeting at work to go pick up her daughter, and she kind of seems very ungrateful. Yeah, she cooks curry rice, and then Jing writes bitch in the sauce, which is kind of sets off her mum a bit. So we see all these things kind of piling up on her, stress from work. She tries to reconnect with her ex-husband. There's a point where Jing thinks she's sick with COVID, and she tells her mother to stay away from her and don't get near her, and she doesn't leave her room. So we see kind of this stress build up on her. But then something interesting happens. It's when I think there's a night where there's a rainstorm, and her mother kind of is asking for Jing to come out, talk to her or just do something, and Jing's not in her room. So she runs out in the rain and she looks for Jing. She's shouting for her in the rain. And it's kind of this really, I think there's kind of the soundtrack kind of plays up a bit, and it's a very kind of cinematic moment. But then it kind of just cuts straight back to the condo that they live in. Jing gets a phone call to say that her mother is in the hospital. So Jing goes to yeah, goes to, check up on her mum. And we kind of find out that her mother, Pinwen, is actually kind of suffering from psychosis. So at this point, we see Pinwen as I guess, an unreliable protagonist. So the way that Jing maybe was acting at the start was not entirely true. Part of it is probably Pinwen's kind of illness and delusion. So we see kind of a switch. Jing becomes like the mother in a sense, but she's not completely absolved as like being unbratty, but we see her take a lot of like responsibility to like look after her mum. She has to stay home from school, and yeah, this is where we see like the really two great performances. I think Alyssa Chia, who plays Pin Wen, she won, I think, the Best Actress, and I think they were both nominated for Best Actress for the Golden Horse Awards. Jing's played by Gingo Wang. I'd seen her in a video game adaptation of a movie called Detention, which is a pretty good movie. I'm not sure, it's not available on Netflix, but I think there's a series that's based off the game as well. It's kind of set in Taiwan during like the 1960s, the White Terror days of like secret police and whatnot. I won't go in too much into that, but yeah, it's a good game. You can get that on Steam. But yeah, like what I find really interesting about this movie is that, well, what it is sort of like, I mean, COVID and the pandemic do play a role in this movie. You do see the kids at the school, they all have to go through these machines and face temperature scanner things, and you can see how, everyone's being affected by it. But it's not really about it at all. It's definitely about Jing trying to understand her mother, in a sense, because when her mother starts suffering from psychosis, it's interesting because the movie again plays with a lot of different mixes of genres. Particularly, there are some kind of like horror thriller elements, and this movie is in no way a horror movie or a thriller. But there are this kind of few interesting sequences in this movie. Like there's a scene where I think Jing comes home and she finds that her mother's, her friends kind of missed her from school because the isolation period that was set by them had finished, but they wondered why Jing wasn't going to school, so they missed her. So they tried to surprise her, and they're like playing like Wii tennis with their mother, and they're all eating pizza. And it's kind of like a happy scene until one of the friends is like, we hope like your mother gets better. Like, what are you sick with? And then they kind of regret asking that question. So then the mother gets kind of suspicious. Like after they leave, she's like, what were you saying to your friends about me? And Jing kind of, tries to give a very vague answer. And the mother, she becomes sort of like terrifying in a sense that she's very, she talks to her like that kind of whispery serial killer voice, and then will suddenly like raise her voice, and she like spits like water on like Jing. And I was just really surprised by it. I was like, wow, like I didn't expect her to be, so like terrifying. And then like shortly after that, there's a scene where Pinwen is like looking for something in all the closets in her room, and she's like ripped out all the clothes, and then Jing can hear it like through her music, and she hears like this ruffling. Again, it's kind of like a horror movie, kind of hearing scratches and noises in the distance. And then she goes to check on her mum, and then it's like the mum starts accusing her of like stealing money she was saving for her to go to college, and for stealing a passport. And like Jing doesn't know what she's talking about. And what makes like this scene and a couple of other scenes in the movie, like when something's wrong, you can kind of see a lot of the you'll notice that there's a lot of headspace, like empty like frame above the mother, so she's not framed quite right. So it kind of looks odd. And there's also something called like short sighting. So basically there's kind of like the rules of three, where you'll put a character, either on different thirds of the screen, but there's points where they put where Pinwen's character is too far to the right of the screen when she's supposed to be like on the other side, so it just looks weird. And when you kind of use it to this effect, it's pretty frightening. And there's also points where it's like, she's center frames where she's not in the third of the screen at all. The camera kind of pushes in, and it's kind of like this weird, like thriller-esque kind of thing. So like, yeah, you kind of see the horror of the psychosis from Jing's point of view. She fears her mother. There's also another scene where Pinwen she wakes her daughter up, and she tells her about this dream of their condo being like stripped down, and a dream where there's a child like who's playing too close to the edge of the building and is about to like fall off or something. And then she's kind of just standing over her, and she just tells her daughter that she's just been watching her for a really long time. She says, like, why didn't you ask me how long I sat here and watched you? So it kind of reminds me of that scene in Paranormal Activity where, like, I think the girl just stares at the guy for a really long time. So it kind of like, adds to this weird, creepy tension, to the film. And it's actually pretty tense. So that's what was quite interesting, because this movie's, I think when you look on Netflix, it's billed as like a psychological drama with like, and it's dark. And it is. Like, it definitely is, with like these scenes where it can kind of make you feel very uneasy. But the movie is not all horror as I've kind of mentioned it. Like, you see kind of a lot of like, nicer moments. I guess there's a switch. It's interesting. There's probably like a tonal switch where it comes from the more tense part of the film where Jing is fears her mother, but like I think her mother gets admitted to like, one of the hospitals, and the nurses tells her she should try to understand and look from her mother's point of view. So we see that Pinwen, like, she goes back home and she thinks that there's like these guards outside her door, and then like Jing kind of asks like, what are the guards like? And she goes outside and pretends to be like the guards and tells them to leave. So there's actually quite a nice shift later when we see that like Jing really cares for her mother. We see that she really like fears like losing her affection. I think is one of the main parts of the first half of the film. And we also see like their kind of estranged dad who started a new family, and she kind of rejects him. It's because when she becomes like this new, I guess, sort of matriarch of the family, like she kind of sees that like adults are like bullshit. I guess like she kind of falls. She's trying to get into like different, access different things. Like she's trying to access like her mother's accounts, because I think when she gets severed from her job, like she needs money to pay one of the house workers because they hadn't paid their in months, and they hadn't paid their condo bill in months, and like just for like little things, like it's like, can I like get access, like, oh, you need to you're underage, you're under 20, like you need to have a guardian, like, where's your mother? And she's like, oh, my she's in hospital. And like the dad is like not part of the family anymore. And then it's quite urgent for Jing. And then the banker's like, oh yeah, then you need a lawyer, and it's quite frustrating to deal with these kind of things. And even initially when Pinwen is in the hospital after running out into, I guess, the phantom rain, it's kind of like she goes to the hospital and they're like, you guys called me because my mother is here. And the dude's like, oh yeah, we're in a pandemic, so we need your insurance card. And she's like, well, I didn't bring one because I was in a rush. You guys told me to get here. But like she didn't even take a taxi there. She just like ran all the way there. And then the guy's like, oh, well, you just have to go back and get it. And then it's you know, it's kind of like just all these you can kind of see why these rules are there, but like it's just a lot of bullshit reasoning, you know. In some of the lighter moments of this movie, again, there's a little bit of dry humor. There's a particular scene where Jing and Pinwen are at a kind of just like a small grocery store, and there's like this old dude who's just looking at this packet of cookies, and he's talking to the cashier. He's like, you know, did they make these cookies smaller? Like, are these smaller now? And the cashier's like, no, they've always been the same size. And the old dude just keeps inspecting this packet of cookies, and he's just like, oh, I'm sure they were bigger back then, a while ago. And then he just takes a really long time, and then he's like, you know, okay, I'll get these cookies. And then he's like putting the money on the counter, like very slowly, very with like, you know, basically like the old Asian guy putting like coins very slowly on the desk. And then he says like, but I'm sure that these were bigger. And then like Pinwen kind of gets really pissed off and just like tells the dude to hurry up. And she kind of like slaps him like in the back of the head, which is, you know, not morally correct, but very funny. But then the guy's like, how dare you like do that to me? And then he tries to like fight, but like the employee and another guy are like holding the old man back, and he's like flailing his legs, like trying to kick her. And it looks really funny. And there's a couple of these scenes. I was actually talking to Risky earlier today, and we're talking about how it's a very kind of like Asian thing that you notice, just kind of like, you know, older crowd. As much as we love them, you know, there's this kind of you know, in effect that probably people are annoyed by this, but like no one really wants to say it. But yeah, just like a nice humorous moment. I think one thing I'd have to say about The Falls, whether it's regarded as a criticism or not, like the plot's fairly minimal, and the shift from it being, as I said, kind of this tension between the mother and daughter, things seem to kind of conveniently work out for them. You know, they kind of repair their relationship a bit. The mother's condition does get better. You know, she takes medicine, and they decide, you know, they kind of want to keep moving on with their lives. But I'd call it not slow, but there's definitely a lot more retrospection. I think I watched this movie a few times, and on the third time I realized that there's quite a bit more to the movie that I didn't pick up the first few times watching it. The first couple of times watching it, it kind of makes a bit more sense. You know, what they're talking about and a lot of the symbolism. I think this movie is really good is because you can get a different interpretation each time you watch it, or you discover new things each time you watch it. You need a little bit of patience, but you know, I guess like this is this is kind of my jam, really, like these kind of slow burn movies. But I think it can be a pretty entertaining movie at points. I think it's definitely kind of like a gateway into like this very interesting version of like Taiwan cinema, because just to briefly mention Classmates Minus again, it's kind of like this strange mix of like noir with comedy with, I guess, Classmates Minus didn't really have a tense scene, but it's kind of the use of its soundtrack. Though I'd say with The Falls, I think it's a bit more conventional with its soundtrack. There's actually some more use of its like orchestral swells during the first half of the film, but then there's also like this kind of banjo that like kind of plays. I'm not sure if it's a banjo. It sounds like one, but it could be a completely different instrument. But yeah, I think you know, I think it shares a lot of themes with A Son Again. You know, it's about like the family, and again that kind of that shift in tone. I don't think this movie is as strong as A Son, but I would say that it still like holds its own. And what really shocked me was the ending of this movie, which obviously I won't spoil. I didn't really expect it, and it left me feeling very strange. Like I wouldn't call it a particularly good or a particularly bad ending. It's like, I think there's a really big kind of tension at the climax of this movie. I think it's because of the contrast of, the slower retrospective second half that it kind of comes out of nowhere, but it's also very effective. I won't talk too much about the ending, but I think one of the big draws to this movie is, like the mix of genres and the ending, really. Of course, the performances are great, but I think this movie's, you reward yourself for like sticking through to the end. And it's definitely worth watching a few more times. Hopefully, you guys will check these movies out. I think, A Son is probably like a masterpiece for this director, but I think The Falls as well is really one of the best movies of this year that I've seen, and will probably end up on one of my best lists. Again, they're out on Netflix. Really easy to access. Netflix, chuck it on. But I've always been wanting to explore Taiwan cinema a bit more. I think they are a new artistic voice to watch out for in the world of Asian cinema. Hopefully we get to cover more films that come from there. A lot of very talented filmmakers from that part of the world. But I think I'm going to let you guys go and check these two movies out because they're really good. Alrighty then. I guess I should say, subscribe to whatever platform you're listening to us on. Was it like YouTube, Spotify, Apple? Whenever you listen to one of our regular episodes, you can just hear what Dan says. He remembers them all. I'm kind of just the artistic snob that just, that just kind of just glazes through. But alright guys, I'll see you next time.